Okay, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole budget meeting of January 9th, 2019 to order. I would like to first begin tonight's meeting by reading a safety notice. In the event of an emergency, please evacuate council chambers to the nearest exit through the chamber doors to our left and obey all instructions given by the clerk. If assistance is required, please see the clerk. Once you have evacuated the building, please gather in the front parking lot outside of the town hall. Also, the Town of Lincoln Committee and council meetings are posted on our YouTube channel. I would like to thank the public for attending. Thank you, Mr. Jansen. Tonight's meeting, and Mr. Culp. And I just want to remind you, everyone, of our rules for engagement to please be respectful while others are speaking and to refrain from clapping. Delegations will have 5 minutes to speak and are asked to stay focused on the agenda items. And that reminds me, that little tone, please remember to silence all your cellular devices during tonight's meeting. Roll call. So, to my left, our illustrious CAO, Mr. Mike Kirkopoulos. Next to him, Councillor Paul McPherson, Councillor Mike Michaluk, Councillor Lynn Timmers, and Councillor Greg Reimer. To my right, Your Worship Sandra Easton, Councillor Tony Bernay, Councillor Diane Rinchima, and Councillor Adam Russell. And we have our staff in attendance. Are there any declarations of interest this evening? Okay, I see none. There are no statutory public meetings on tonight's agenda. So we're going to delve right into delegations. We have one delegation this evening. Please note that delegations may speak for a maximum of 5 minutes. Our first delegation is Mr. Rob Jansen, speaking to item 7.1, the capital budget review. Mr. Jansen, would you like to come forward, please?
Well, good evening, Mayor, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank you, by the way, for the nice Christmas card I received and the good wishes. And also, from my side, I'd like to wish everybody a very good and healthy 2019. I was wondering in what Mr. Persevera mentioned, the clerk mentioned to me there was 5 minutes indeed to speak. Would you give me the courtesy for 2 minutes extra?
You know what? I'll have to ask my committee members around the table.
I will make it very quick.
Okay.
That I can promise you.
Okay.
Before the final budget will be presented, I trust that you did receive background information in reference to this presentation, which in my humble opinion is relevant for future planning and budgeting. The presented information sets a very sobering stage concerning the current financial state of affairs of our governments and many Canadian families. With this in mind, I'd like to urge you to be careful and disciplined with the developing and approving of the 2019 budget. During the all candidates meeting before the election, we heard comments from the public who were concerned as residents of Lincoln, being born and raised here, to be pushed out of the community due to the rapid increasing property taxes. In 2018, because of a significant spending increase, a 5.6% property tax was agreed on. I hope that Council recognizes the concerns expressed by residents. As previously discussed, Lincoln is a growing community and as such will need a certain level of investment. There is a strong emphasis on growth in Lincoln. The other side of the coin is that, as a rule of thumb, the larger communities grow, the more expensive they become to live in. It is important that the town of Lincoln controls development within its borders carefully and maintains its small town character, what makes Lincoln such an attractive area. During the last election, almost the complete councils from Niagara-on-the-Lake and Grimsby were replaced. One of the main reasons for this was the out-of-control growth development in these towns and the problems related to it. Pelham's council was completely replaced due to the out-of-control spending. We need efficient, effective, and leaner governments, not bigger. Last year, Lincoln spent approximately 40%, or just over $12 million, of its budget on salaries and benefits, which is considerable for a small town. Doing business in Lincoln today is more and more hampered by bureaucracy and red tape. I talked to different people in Lincoln's business community who experienced a similar trend. It is becoming more complicated and costlier instead of simpler and more business-friendly. One example was the renewed effort to implement the backflow valve system. I heard different people who experienced issues with this policy, as we did. We complied with this policy 2 years ago at the cost of thousands of dollars, as well with the mandatory yearly testing of this system at hundreds of dollars each time. Since the start of the backflow valve implementation into our business, we were confronted with several issues beyond our control for us to deal with, and as such, taking valuable time away from conducting our own business. As a company, we absolutely support sensible safety measures, with the emphasis on sensible to protect our fresh water. In that regard, I do have a few questions. Why are all companies treated the same to comply with the backflow valve policy? And why are companies not screened beforehand to find out if their kind of business does pollute water or not? As a company, we don't use water to run our business, except for personal use, which is basically residential use. In that context, we don't drain business-generated wastewater back into the system. It would be much fairer if businesses which do drain polluted water back in the system would pay for the backflow charges. By charging every business, it gives the impression that it is an easy money grab. Safety measures are good, but over-regulating is an economy killer. The above are just a few issues in regards to the 2019 budget deliberations I wanted to bring to your attention. And as residents and businesses, we look forward to a sustainable outcome. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Jansen. Are there any questions from council? Okay, well, I've got one. Mayor Easton.
Well, Mr. Jansen, I certainly don't want you leaving without some response because you're almost the only person that comes in to provide any perspective for us at all, and thank you very much for that. So, Mr. Chairman, through you, I would just ask Mr. Jansen if he were sitting at the table and dealing with the diversity that's in our community in terms of a community where the average age is 45 and a half approximately. How would you look at the increasing demands for customer service as well as the level of service that we provide? Because this is certainly one of the challenges that we face. As well, I would ask you to consider the fact that this is a consolidated community, as you well know, and whereas other communities that surround us may have 1 or 2 fire stations, we have 4, and we have 2 libraries and a variety of other multiples where we really need, for a variety of reasons, to protect our community. Maybe I would appreciate it if you could give us some perspective on that, because I don't believe for a moment that you think that we are being frivolous. You are providing us with some guidance, and you're being firm about it, and I very much appreciate that. I'm sure that we all do. But those are just 2 of the areas that we struggle with, including all of the legislation that we have absolutely no control over, which, in fact, is exactly what the growth plan is all about. And so that, again, is something that we do not control. How would you help us out here?
Well, I very much appreciate what you're saying there, Mayor. Yes, as I pointed out, I don't have all the details, the numbers handy. It was more as as you mentioned, a guideline, especially with the growth issue, that we're looking at the needs, not at the wants. And services, yes, absolutely. And I'm talking about basic services. They need to be there, available for every resident in Lincoln. When you look at, to draw the line with services which you're gonna question, are they a need or a want? My focus was especially to be, when I said disciplined, to carefully check the issues at stake and see where and what you need to spend on. Again, I don't have all the numbers here and all, so that is hard for me to talk about. But when I talk to, they see quite an increase in the growth of the town hall itself. And I understand that comes with a growing community. But at the same token, you want to be careful because the region of Niagara is an incredible bureaucratic, disasters may be hard to say, but it is too much, and red tape. And that is reflecting on our economy. It's reflecting on businesses. And again, for me, it is emphasizing to pay attention to these issues. And I'm not saying this is an easy thing to do. But as you pointed out, if nobody speaks out, everybody might think, hey, everything is well. But I hear, especially with the population, we know there's a lot of input from outside of Lincoln coming to our area. But it is the people who live here and who we all know many of, they are struggling. So again, it is a fine balance to draw. And again, I don't have the ready-to-go answer for you. I wish I had it, then it would be easy. That's why I say it is a challenge.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Jansen. Thank you, Chair. And I appreciate the fact that you respond to us in phases as this budget is being developed. It gives us more opportunities to have conversations with you. I spent the day at the region today with Councillor Foster. We did budget all morning, and yesterday as well, and again tomorrow. And the number of decisions that we make that are directly influenced by people that are nowhere near this town is really quite significant. And so it isn't difficult. It is difficult, but we are up to the task. I think we've worked very hard, but I'm very appreciative of the fact that you stay involved and that you are a reasonable man and that you try to bring forward those thoughts and ideas that will catch our attention. Thank you so much.
Thank you for all the work you do.
Councillor Mikulik.
Through you, Chair, to Mr. Jansen.
Yeah.
I too want to thank Mr. Jansen for coming and representing people. There's so many people that are uninterested in the budget, and the budget and the operations of the town is one of the reasons why I ran, and I look forward to representing the people of town or my ward and ensuring that we're all fiscally responsible and accountable to the stewardship of your finance. And
I appreciate also that there's people here from the business community who know exactly what I'm talking about, and even people who are not, they understand it. Because when you read the information you received prior, it gives you a pretty good realistic picture of what is happening not in our country, in our province, but also here in the region. And so there are definitely issues to be aware of. And you know, that is why it is affecting all of us. But you are aware of the issues at stake. And also prudence is a big issue. I just wanted to emphasize this. But thank you very much for your comments.
I appreciate your attendance.
Mr. Kirkopoulos, did you just want to provide some closure before we actually move into the budget?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you, I think just to council and to Mr. Jansen. And Mr. Jansen and I did meet a few weeks ago, right before the holidays, and we spoke about a lot of the topics that he brought up this evening. And I also shared with him, and I think, you know, one of the things that may have gotten missed in Mr. Jansen's comments, and I think that the mayor highlighted, is that, you know, in a lot of ways, I think we're doing a lot of the things that Mr. Jansen highlights. We're trying to take prudent approach to our budgeting process. We're trying to look at being open for business and eliminating some of that red tape. And do we always get it right? No. Can we get better? I think absolutely most of us can. And we spoke at length about the whole affordability piece, and we are trying to share a little bit more of that information with council around affordability and how we stack up with others. And I know Mr. Jensen and I talked both about where we fall within the region, but also provincially and federally, and how some of those policies impact us, knowing what we collect from the average taxpayer is such a small piece of what that broader tax policy and tax regime looks like, not only in our province, but in our country and as well locally. So from a staff perspective, also acknowledging and thanking him for his input, not just when he comes here and delegates, but even in those kind of offline conversations when he's here at Town Hall, where he pops in and we do speak. So as I said, open for business seemed to be a theme there, and that will be something that you know, we look at more further in terms of expediting with our businesses, and you'll see some of those things as we share the budget.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks again, Mr. Jansen, for coming in as always and you know, being that social conscience for us. You know what, we've had the experience this year of, as we come into the budget, of the campaign, going door to door, hearing firsthand from the residents, you know, wants versus needs. You know, what they want, and hopefully that's going to, you know, hasn't fallen on deaf ears, and we'll be going through the budget and looking for those things and looking for the open for business approach, because, you know, we've got a lot of building starts happening. We've got a lot of businesses relocating here. We've got a economic development officer who's opening doors that we didn't even dream could be opened. We thought might be locked shut. So with the help of a great team that we have here, and council, you know, providing that push, you know, to not be so bureaucratic, to, you know, change those ways that, you know, this is the way we've always done it. Well, we don't accept that, you know. If we can do it better, if we can do it smarter, if we can do it cheaper, if we can do it faster, then we're all for that. We're all for innovation. We're all for moving the town forward. And like the mayor usually says in her preamble to our council meetings, I think Lincoln is the best town in Niagara to live in, and we all need to do our part to make it better. So thank you again for coming tonight. I encourage you to stick around and hear the CAO and Ms. Stefani's presentation as an overview on the budget, because things aren't as bleak as they seem. So, we've got no consent agenda this evening. So our regular agenda, we are now considering item 7.1, capital budget review, and staff will be providing a presentation on this subject. So we've got Mr. Kirkopoulos and Ms. Stefani for our first kick at the budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to council, as well as the public, both here in attendance and those watching. You're right, this is the start of the process, and I want to emphasize that, we encourage questions, encourage information that council is seeking that we can come back with at future meetings. And so this is going to be a very iterative conversation, I hope, once Angela and I are done our presentation. There are senior staff here that will be able to answer questions that are simple in nature. We do have some handouts that we can and will provide, but again, we will take requests for information and we will bring back those requests at future meetings for council. So in terms of a budget introduction, you've seen some version and some iteration of why we do what we do here, why you do what you do here, and I think about community impact being at the center of that. So we've shared this with you in years past. And then what are those, I think, things that feed into community impact when we look at governance, when we look at policies, when we look at how we make our decisions? I think of smart growth, so those principles for planning and decision-making, and we heard a little bit about that. How do we maintain our character, while at the same time planning for things that impact us, that are beyond our control in a lot of ways? Local, regional, and provincial policy. So you've heard us say before, we're creatures of the province, and a lot of that provincial policy affects and impacts how we do things and why we do things. So everything from the official plan, asset management policies and asset management requirements that we now have to have in place. And then I think of development charges, something that is laid out in provincial policy and dictates how we collect money and why we collect money. And we'll share a little bit more about that as we move forward. Council priorities is a significant and key input. You are coming off an election. You are at the beginning of a 4-year term. So highlighting for council and hearing from council what are your priorities as we move forward is also integral and goes into that community impact and that conversation around priorities and projects moving forward. Of course, where we are today in that under that bucket or umbrella of business planning, so the budget planning process, you'll recall that in previous years, we've been in front of you a lot sooner. This year is different. It is the first year of a new term, and as a result of an election, we're in front of you a lot later than we would have liked to be. However, as I was saying to Chair Pachariva earlier and to a few of the councillors, by the time we finish this process, we will likely be in a position to be starting next year's process when we think about finishing this process in the spring. So some of the other things that go into business planning, our work plans, our capital planning on a broader scale, and we'll talk about those shortly. And then obviously program and service delivery. You've heard us talk about what is legislated, what is beyond our control, what are those legal obligations we have, what are the mandated things we have to do, and of course, those growth and strategic elements and just basic service delivery. There are certain things people expect from their municipality: snow clearing, cutting the grass, ensuring safe and adequate equipment. So those are all things, and they're all inputs that lead to and are part of community impact. So on the budget planning piece, this is a year-round process. There are significant and many inputs that go into it. There is a planning and reporting back that we do and can continue to do better. And then there is the ongoing feedback for budget planning. And I think every year since I've been here and over the last 3 budgets, we've tried to do more of this. Angela's introduced a lot of this, as has the entire senior management team. But just that ongoing feedback process from you and with you will continue in subsequent years. So our 2019 budget themes and guiding principles, you heard it earlier from Mr. Jansen, you've heard it from us countless times. Lincoln is one of the fastest growing municipalities in Niagara right now. With that comes opportunities, but also comes challenges. As such, to support some of those growth principles we highlighted earlier, our budget does aim to invest and take a focus. So typically, when we start budget processes, there is more projects and more needs than there are funds available to do them. And so when we think of what's coming, what does that look like in the future, trying to be anticipatory, growth and development is driving a lot of our agenda. It's driving a lot of your agenda. So as it relates to capital, there are 4 consistent areas that municipalities use when they communicate about capital, and we've adopted those. We did that last year through a council report and through council's direction. So 1, environment and safety; 2, transportation; 3, social; and 4, capital. And just to give you an example or an idea of what each of those categories are. Under transportation, you see things like traffic control and street lighting, roads, bridges, and culverts. And then you can see environmental services is our fire rescue and water and wastewater. The social infrastructure is what we refer to as when we talk about our community facilities or parks, libraries. And then corporate infrastructure, the buildings, civic offices, operation facilities, recreation facilities, fleet, and the technology equipment. So a little bit about Lincoln. Again, none of this should come as a surprise to you. Our population growth in the last 5 years has been near 6%. We are expected to grow by anywhere to 40 to 50% in the next 15 years. We're the fourth fastest growing municipality in Niagara, and our average age is a little under 43 years, distributed as you see there below, with the majority being in the 30 to 64 age range. We hear a lot about affordability, and this is a slide that we've taken from the BMA study, which is a study done across the province that rates municipalities. And so when you look at where we stand from an affordability perspective, and a lot of municipalities are looking at affordability, and I understand those that may be naysayers of affordability quotients that say, well, that part of what drives that may or may not be the affluent nature of one's community, but this is what municipalities often compare themselves to, and we do compare ourselves to, and we do rank pretty well when we think of Niagara and we think of what's going on in the region. We are the second lowest in terms of affordability, and we look at property taxes as a percent of household income. And then when we add water and sewer, which are significant expenditures, and I think as the mayor highlighted earlier, you look at the fact that we've got 4 distinct communities, if not more, and how widespread that is in needing to accommodate those communities and the capital needs of all of those communities, we still ranked as the 4th lowest. So I would say from an affordability standpoint, we continue to do well, and we'll continue to look at this as a barometer of how we're doing. But in addition to this, looking at other inputs. This isn't the only one, but I think it is important to share this with council, and we will continue to share more information. This is a slide that I do like to share with council because I think it's important when we look at the value of all the assets that you're responsible for as council, that we're responsible on your behalf for as staff. And this is about $500 million, a little under 400 million in assets that you're responsible for. That is a huge responsibility. It's a huge undertaking. It's an important undertaking. And so the breakdown is, as you see there below, half being for roads and the other half split between a number of the other assets that council is responsible for. So some of our drivers, again, I don't think any of this comes as a surprise to council. Priorities, your priorities, what you hear at the door, what you've heard, drives our capital budget process. Asset management, things that we're mandated to complete and assess and look at in terms of life cycle and the health of the asset. Looking at strategic asset investment. Can we leverage certain things? Can we replace things before the cost to repair exceeds the cost to replace, and what does that look like? Of course, operational needs, what is required just to do our work, and some of that is the basic work. Service level growth. Again, there's a demand on services. Everything we try to bring to council is based on need. It's based on what is that return on investment and maximizing your assets. New capital growth is driving us, and of course, just internal capacity to deliver on all of these projects for you. So, a little bit of a summary in terms of community impact and those drivers. We have a responsibility for continued investment in our community. I've shared with you, those charts and statistics that show tax increases over the past 10 years and where they've been and what that average has been, approximately 4.01 on our piece, and I highlight our piece being the piece that the municipality is responsible for, which is only 1/3 of the tax bill. Fortunately or unfortunately, we deliver the entire tax bill to residents, and so we are the delivery vehicle for the message from the school board as well as the message from the region as well as our own message. But when we look at the last 10 years, it's allowed us to sustain services But really, from an enhancement perspective, when I think a lot of our operational works, we haven't seen enhancements on the operational side and operational works. So when we look at growth projections over the next 15 years, one thing I think you want us to do, that I've heard you say, and that we believe we have a responsibility to do, is share with you what that future looks like. What does the next 5, 10, 15 years look like, so that we can begin to prepare for those future generations. I've said to council on a number of occasions, I think a lot of the decisions you have before you and have had before you over the last term are generational in their nature. They're important, they're going to require analysis, and they're going to require some difficult decisions so that we put our community on the right path for moving forward. Invest now to support future growth. There is a growth lag. We talk a lot about what is this growth lag in terms of when can we see the taxes based on the decisions you make now or the development that occurs now. So we started a process for prudence, for example, but by the time those first set of taxes come in, there's a number of years that will lapse in that. We will benefit from those monies coming in, but in order to get some of those monies, for example, it requires us to spend some money now. And so there's often that growth lag that people refer to. Climate change and significant weather events. I share these with you because on any given year, we don't know what things beyond our control bring. We've had a very mild winter. That's a good thing. When we think of our budget, when we think of our vehicles, when we think about wear and tear. But on any given year, we could have a storm. We could evacuate people like we did a year ago, which was fairly unprecedented. And we could find ourselves in a position where we need to make some emergency and immediate expenditures. There is an infrastructure gap, and that is something that when we look at every municipality, it's something that's being experienced. There is not enough money to do all of the infrastructure we'd like to do. So there is a perpetual gap that continues to exist. This council has supported an infrastructure levy. Each year, you'll see that presented as part of this budget as we move forward. But that infrastructure levy is a way for us to start putting money in the bank for the future so that we can start planning, so that we can have money there and we can make our roads program and other infrastructure programs sustainable. And so there's also factors that impact the average family, but that are broad-based. So when we talk about taxes often, the municipality does have an impact on that, but oftentimes the biggest impact comes from property assessment. Things that are market-driven, things that are based on global and economic indicators that oftentimes are beyond just the local area municipalities' control. So a little bit of the overview of 2019. What is a capital budget? Again, stuff that you've heard from us before. It pays for all new municipal infrastructure investments and the rehabilitation of our assets. There is an impact to the levy. Funding capital projects is also included in the operating budget in the overall levy requirements. And so most of our capital plan, our capital projects are covered either through reserves, development charges, or other accounts, and a small portion does impact and does come from the levy. So every year, we're asked this question around what are the outstanding capital projects. You have a list of them here. Senior staff are here to answer any questions on these specifically if you have them, and we can definitely come back to them at the end of the presentation. These are here, and you'll see some of these have dates that are 2017 or 18 or even 16 in terms of when they were first discussed and the first set of the budget dollars were put aside. But some of these things change as a result of the speed at which the development's happening, because some of them are development driven. If I think about Jordan Village, earlier Councillor Mikulik highlighted this was something that's been in the works for 4 years. Absolutely correct. There was a significant change to that project in terms of the design. And then there was an appeal and a couple of appellants. Those are things that delay projects for us and that mean they continue to be on our books. They're outstanding capital projects and that we bring them forward and we get them done as quickly and as soon as possible when issues are resolved. So here are our funding carryover practices, specifically as it relates to those outstanding projects. If the funding source is the capital levy, the funds are usually carried forward. If the project is canceled, those funds go back into our capital rate stabilization fund to be repurposed in the future for other projects. If they come out of our DCs or reserve and reserve funds, they're either transferred back to those and have no impact on the reserve. So before we go into, I think, some of the questions around the project specifically, this year we're looking at a $13.4 million capital program. The impact to the levy is approximately $1.3 million. In 2018, the impact was $1.29 million in terms of levy impact. So we have got approximately a $51,000 increase from 2018 to 2019. Again, when we go through the project, you'll see that the major investments are occurring around transportation and environment and safety service groups. So here we have all 35 projects, a little bit small, but we are going to go into them. Again, separated in the 4 categories: corporate infrastructure, social infrastructure, environment and safety, and transportation. So the considerations that we put before you for council as we start this conversation, a focus on impact to levy and funding sources. Those have the most impact if we're looking at decreasing, increasing. Of course, we're open to hearing additions, deferrals, or removal, should that be council's will. This is a holistic budget consideration that we put in front of you. You'll see continued investment in all assets of the community, both hard and soft infrastructure. Typically, the way we like to structure our projects, when possible, is multi-year, where we do accurate design and costing in 1 year, followed by builds and construction in the second year. And then projects by category, I think, demonstrate investment in the various service components. We've tried to get away from departmental focuses and move to more resident and end user focuses when we're analyzing the projects that we have before you. There is a lot of analysis. There's a lot of work that goes into these projects. It's a culmination of plans and work that's done. When we come before you, and again, trying to drop and get away from the whole departmental piece, but rather what is the right project and why do we want to bring it forward. So when we look at how is that $13 million spread out, you see transportation, environment, and safety are the 2 major drivers of that, followed by social infrastructure and corporate infrastructure. So a little bit of how the pie breaks down, and then the subcategories within the pie. And again, we'll get into these further. When we look at the capital budget and the funding sources for that, you see them broken down there. The capital levy being one piece, a small piece actually, and then when you look at our reserves, our reserve funds, development charges, grants, which we've been very successful at, so monies from other levels of government, and of course, a small component of long-term borrowing. So I think maybe we'll take a pause here, Mr. Chair. Now we're kind of getting into each of those 4 subcategories, but maybe before that, should council have any questions, generally speaking, Angela and or I or any of the staff can answer those.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mike. And I was going to think that this would be a great place to ask questions and break before we delve in to the projects. Now, knowing when we get to the projects tonight, it's our first look at them, we're going to ask questions of clarification, questions of maybe additional information that's required. We're not going to pick winners and losers. We're not going to evaluate the merits of them. But knowing that we've just finished going door to door, we've got input from our residents, I'd encourage you to ask those more strategic questions right now. How you see the budget process, things like that. So that'll be the opportunity now while Mr. Karkopoulos and Ms. Safani are before you. So, of course, my little Christmas tree has lit up, so we will go through and ask those questions. And a reminder, too, because I was guilty of this the other night, don't hit your button and turn it off until you've finished your line of questioning. And it continues to light, so let's start. So, Councillor Russell, you are first tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, through you, Mr. Chair, to the senior staff. With 22 outstanding capital projects, if the budget were approved as presented, how many of the 35 planned projects do you realistically think could be completed within the year, outside of those that will be maybe approved conditionally based on certain kind of funding here and there? But realistically, of those 35 planned projects, is it realistic that if 100% approved, that we could realistically complete them all this year?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, why don't I start that question, Councillor, and then definitely turn it over to some of our senior staff. And I think specifically when I look at where most of those fall, I'm going to ask both Director Graham and McKay to provide some comments on those, as well as Angela, should she have them. But our goal in putting these forward, I think, as we've said, is often one of the lenses we use is internal capacity. Some of the projects that you see on the outstanding list that we have, I think about the Jordan project. It's highlighted there as an outstanding project, but it is a project that we've got dedicated staff, resources, and consultants already working on. But I think it's important and to be transparent, to share that it is an outstanding project, and if we were to look at it, it would show up there. A lot of the projects we have are already in progress. They've already started. They're just things that we've carried over. So I have no reason to believe that we wouldn't complete any of these, short and above those that are multi-year projects. There's often times where we try to phase some of our works. You'll see one of the projects, our redundant dispatch, Phase 6. So oftentimes we do have phased projects. We do it in a phased way, both from a financial perspective as well as a capacity perspective. So I have no reason to believe from a capacity perspective we wouldn't be able to complete most of these projects that are projects that require us to complete in certain efforts in certain phases. But of course, I caution myself in saying that, knowing that there's often things that we often refer to as fly-ins that occur, things that take priority over other things that sometimes change priorities. Some things that council brings forward are things that happen that are beyond our control. But I'll ask Dave, followed by Shannon, to maybe provide some comments on that.
Thank you, Mike. Back through the councillor. Some of our projects from 2018, a lot of the projects are referred to as design projects, where we're actually trying to prepare a project to go to construction, so it's in the design phase. We're sort of monitoring some of the development progress, so some of our projects are related to developments, because we want to be ready to respond with road upgrades or servicing upgrades to accommodate a development project. So sometimes it's dependent on the progress of the actual development. So if the development isn't progressing as along as maybe we anticipated it, then our work is kind of on hold a little bit. So, but our goal is to align them when they occur. So you see some of that. Most of the projects, I would say, we will be completing. When it comes to construction projects, our goal is to build the projects in that year. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Excellent question, Councillor Russell. There we go. Your Worship. I'm sorry. I can. Oh, okay. So press your thing and get back in the queue. Save those thoughts. I don't think they'll be stolen. Okay. No, you got to wait your turn now. It's going to be the lesson this evening. Councillor MacPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to speak a little bit about process, and I'd really like to generate a conversation around this, because when looking at what we're looking at for the next 5 to 10 years, and looking at things like the growth in our community through residential development, when looking at projects like potentially BDSS, when looking at the Parks Master Plan, when looking at all of these items on the near horizon, I find we're very singular in our look at the capital budget. We're very 1 year. And that's part of what I want to talk about tonight. The other thing is, my way of looking at the list of the capital budget is, I automatically go to the 10-year capital plan, and I look at, okay, what are the projects that are being proposed this year, and what was on what would have been last year's 10-year capital plan for 2019. So when looking at those numbers, first of all, we had 54 projects on the 2019 capital plan, and for the new councilors, you probably haven't seen this yet, but we had 54 projects that were valued at $28 million, and this is no shot at anybody, but to me, planning is about as accurate, accuracy, and how well can you accurately plan over at least a short period of time, not necessarily 10 years, but if we're putting out a 10-year capital plan, I would expect that the first 3 years are fairly accurate. And yeah, there's going to be changes. Yeah, there's going to be things that come at us that we have to react to. But to look at our plan and say, 54 projects at 28 million, when we spent on average about 11 or 12 million dollars a year for the past, say, 3 years. And I think I understand why we had 54 projects, because we've got all that stuff to do. And I wonder, from a process standpoint, if we shouldn't be looking at that to say, we got $13 million, 12 or $13 million to spend, roughly. Maybe it's 15 million, I don't know what it is. Let's be as accurate as we can over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, based on what we know today, and then we deal with the changes as they come. But looking at the list now, we've got 54 projects. 15 of the 32 are on that list. 17 aren't. So, as a counselor, when people ask me, when's this going to happen, I go to the 10-year capital plan. And I say, well, it's going to happen in 2021. Well, but based on what we saw on this list, I'm not confident that's going to happen. So I'm wondering, and again, I put this out for discussion, is there a way, I would also say that looking at the list that we've got, there are things that I had no idea that we were looking at doing that, up until, the time a week ago or 2 weeks ago, I got the list. So, I think that there's an opportunity here for improvement. Maybe it's not this year, but there's an opportunity for improvement to get more together, being SMT and council, on what hits that list, and have that done in advance of us getting the list, so that, because I feel like, I'm gonna be the bad guy, because, I'm gonna there's something on this list that I'm like, well, no, my project should have been on that list. When there was no prior discussion to get into that priority You know, and yeah, we've only got so much to spend, so how do we spend it? So it's more of a, personally, this is what I do when I receive this package. That's what I do. I go to the information that I have, and I look at what was planned, and what's on the list that was planned, and then what wasn't planned, and then how do these lists look for the next 2 or 3 years? Because I think the other thing that we run the risk of, if we're only looking at, say, 2019, is it may be skewed to one part of town for this particular year. And if we're not looking at a 3 or 4 year window, you know, we may make bad decisions because, well, wait a minute, you're not getting that because you guys got this last time. You know, so I just would like to put that out there as far as I think there's a better way to do the capital plan, especially the capital plan list. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think a few of us want to comment on this. I'm going to start, and then I know Angela wants to make some comments. And again, we did have a earlier conversation, a few of our operational groups on this particular topic. So I think to the councillors, some of your comments, Councillor McPherson, I think never think of yourself as a bad person for bringing up questions. These are good questions, so it is difficult sometimes to ask these questions, but that's why we're here. This is a list that will be iterative in its nature, as I said earlier on. So the 10-year capital plan, and I want others to talk a little bit about the 10-year capital plan, and I know I've said it in the past, and I think we need to do a better job equipping you with how you're going to communicate to residents if you're looking at projects that are in the near or immediate future. Sometimes the 10-year capital plan is the wrong tool to do that. Municipalities do often use them as guiding tools, as wish lists. I think we've thrown all those different words out there. They're meant to be fluid in their nature. They're meant to help us put a bunch of things down. But I understand what you're saying. When we think of multi-year budgeting, when we think of looking at things in a multi-year way and becoming a little bit more deliberate or surgical, then we should be a little closer maybe when we're releasing some of these pieces of information as it relates to certain capital projects. It is a wish list. We often take what we hear, what our asset management plan says. And earlier on in my presentation, I told you every municipality has an infrastructure gap. And they do, because what your asset management plan tells you need to spend money on and what you can afford often leaves you that gap. So one of the inputs into the 10-year capital plan is the asset management plan, but it's also the DC study. And at the end of the day, are they all affordable? No. We need a place to kind of collect them. But I think how we look at those lists versus what is immediate and what we're going to do versus what are those wish list type items that may find their way forward. And sometimes they find their way forward because we receive government funding or we receive something else. But absolutely, I think we can continue to evolve the process. I do want to start it earlier. Every year we've been doing this. We've tried to start it a little bit earlier. I think it does need to involve much more of that kind of collaborative conversation. So I will let Director Safani provide some comments, and I think Shannon and or Dave or any other members of SMT.
Thank you, through you, Chairman. I think the comments you've made are very valid. I think when we're as an SMT working on this 10-year capital plan, and it is a tool for SMT to work towards developing the capital budget, we struggle with the prioritization of where these capital projects will fall and the demands of either growth or development coming in and the timing of that. So not wanting to lose sight of those projects, where do they fall? So sometimes we're giving council a list of 50 some odd projects in 1 year, again, probably not being able to finance that, but showing all the pressures that we may have in that year. So those are the years that we need to make those decisions, and then as we get closer to that timeline, we tighten that up and try and come back to council with a holistic budget that addresses the needs of the current plus future growth needs as well. So to your point, though, if we do a 3-year budget, we do that, we present that to you holistically, and you see what we're planning for year over year, and then we push out those other ones and do a more accurate budgeting for that. So that 10-year plan tool for SMT would be a flow in now for that budget process of 3 years.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, if I could ask, I mean, maybe just Director Dale to speak a little bit about development timing and how that has a major influence on kind of how things come forward.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair. One of the things that we sometimes find very, very hard to plan for is development. There's lots of different parcels in town that are available for development. Sometimes, you know, we do have a heads up because we do have pre-consultation meetings, so we have an idea of, you know, something's on the horizon, but we don't always know the timing of when an application is submitted. So there is a number of times where there's a development proposed, and because that development is proposed, there's consultation with our Public Works Department, and there may be, in order for that development to be accommodated, there may be water lines that need to be extended, roads to be upgraded, you know, sidewalks to be put in. So sometimes what happens is actually the timing of development that forces changes in a lot of the capital projects, because we do try and tie the development, kind of line that up with, you know, when the developer's going to go ahead and when we'd like to upgrade the infrastructure.
And through you, Mr. Chair, and I understand that, and we only can work with what we know today. I mean, I'm not suggesting that we, you know, forecast, you know, well, this development's gonna come on this day. We can only work with what we got. But we got a lot. We got 54 projects in 2019 that we thought we had last year. So we've got a lot. It's more being, maybe it's being harder on ourselves to and if we want to have two different lists, okay, here's the list for 2019. We're going to spend 15 million forecasted, and here's the list. We also have this list, Council, that is the other 25 projects that you had on the 54 project list. And so now we need to make a decision who goes in and who goes out. You know, I don't work well with surprises. And when I just find when I get a package, you know, 10 days before the meeting that we're signing off on, you know, how do I know if Elizabeth Street's the right project? I don't know, because, you know, we haven't talked about the options that are out there or the other projects that are out there that may say, okay, Elizabeth Street, you can wait till next year. We got to do, you know, the street in Ward 1 this year. It's just, and I understand SMT's position. You gotta make the best recommendation you can make. My thinking is, if we work together as a team, you know, maybe it's through the various chairs or whatever it is, we're working together prior to November 1 next year. And we're coming up with, okay, here's the list. We've got input from both sides. We're working this together. And then when we get to November 1st, here's the list. Yeah, we had to make a couple changes because of this just came up, this development. Okay, that's fine. But to come and have 17 of the 32 projects weren't even on the 2019 list last year of 54 projects. I mean, it just, to me, it's just, it's difficult for us as a council to sign off on those. You know, all we're doing is saying, okay, sounds good, here we go. So that's the feeling I had when I looked at this list. And it's not unique to this year. You know, maybe, you know, in other years we're closer to the capital plan that we had, but to me, it's got nothing to do with the election. This is all about the way we've done this for the past 4 years, is we just look at it, okay, here's the list, folks, we got a week to decide, or 2 weeks to decide, let's go. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Councilor McPherson, for those comments. Mr. Karkampos, did you want Mr. Graham to comment, or?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I don't think so. I think we
Okay.
hear,
Well, and
we
having
hear Councillor, you know, McPherson's
Yeah.
comments. You know, one of the things that we haven't provided you this year is an updated 10-year capital plan. And Ms. Safani, I think, did share with you at our our pre-meeting, our agenda review,
Yeah.
that as a result of the DC and that changing, that document changing, that we will be providing that to you. So I think we'll be in a different place heading into next year's budget. And again, I think, we want to start it earlier.
Yeah.
We want to find better ways to, equip you and to continue to gather your input as one of the drivers for the plan.
Yeah,
for sure.
and I appreciate Councillor McPherson's questions, and I, you know what, in the process has evolved since I came on council, and I don't think, and tell me that I'm wrong, but I don't think we want to go back to having, maybe 10 projects identified and the flurry of green sheets, because that doesn't accomplish anything. But again, you know what? It's about refinement. It's about constantly seeking to better the process. And you know what? We've kind of strived to do that over the last little bit. In the 10-year capital plan, when it was first developed during my tenure on council, it was more a placeholder. And the dollar figures that were attached to it weren't really what they were supposed to be. So we got ourselves into the hodgepodge of budgeting, saying this project is going to be X, but it's X plus 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 because other things weren't factored into it. We become much better at that. As we go forward, we are going to get better at that. And we talked about doing a 3-year budgetary process. So we're going to strive for that. And again, as we go through this, and the 10-year capital plan gets updated, something like a snowplow identified at $250,000 in the 10-year capital plan, we know now in the projects $280,000. That we need to update those in subsequent years. We can't leave them static at that because we're setting ourselves up to fail. So, great comments, Councillor, and I look forward to that being part of the process going forward.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, this is a very important point that Councillor McPherson has brought up, but there doesn't appear to be a mechanism for us to have a secondary list of speakers. My question is, how do the rest of us have, respond to his comments, because they're very important.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do that.
Well, you know what, with this system, press your button, and when I get to you, you can. Yeah, so we'll move on to the next person in the queue, and I think you're up 2 hands.
Just a moment.
Yeah.
I had pressed the button, forget about me pressing the button. I went back on the list, but it was to speak about some other matters. So that was that list. This is a new list of speakers. What is the mechanism for the new list of speakers?
Based on the system that we have, I would just keep those, so you're going to be talking about 2 or 3 items when it gets to your turn. Yeah. Oh, you're welcome. Okay. Councillor Brunet.
Thank you, Chair Pachariva. So it's kind of ironic. I hadn't talked to Councillor McPherson, but I think the CAO and a couple of the directors are fully aware that over the last 2 or 3 weeks, most of my inquiries about any of the projects have been not questioning the fact that these are budget items. They're projects that are up for discussion, but just the exact same thing that Councillor McPherson is referring to, and that's trying to align SMT expectations and priorities with, especially after coming off an election year, our priorities as a council, as councillors, from what we heard at the door from residents. And, we were all asked, after the election, in preparation for the budget, to send in what we heard at the door. And, I'm not trying to be critical, but I don't see too much in any of these projects about what we talked at the door. But that's neither here nor there. But I agree completely with Councillor McPherson, and I concur that this is a very difficult process and that I'm not questioning what SMT has done here. It's yeoman's work, it's heavy lifting. But I completely agree, and these are some of the things that I've articulated through you, Mr. Chair, to the CAO over the last 3 weeks, is that, You know, I do believe, and again, this was an election year, but I do believe that there's a necessity to align priorities with collaboration and discussion in preparation for the budget procedure with council and SMT. I could go through dozens of projects that residents have been telling me that they've been waiting for 40 years. And we heard it at the door during the election, and we'll continue to hear it, and they're not in the budget. And so I'll hear about it if I decide to run in 2022. I'll be hearing the same things. And Elizabeth Street, is a project that it's in the budget because why? Because we had ward meetings, and we've been hearing clearly from the residents that in the neighborhood where Elizabeth Street is, there's issues with no sidewalks, kids walking down the middle of the street, going to 2 schools, no sidewalks, no curbs, water issues, people running through stoplights. And so, through ward meetings and through collaboration and discussion, Mr. Graham has prioritized it and moved it up. But in the meantime, we've got residents that have been arguing about Lincoln Avenue for the last 12 years. So, it's about prioritization, but without that collaboration, without aligning the priorities, I completely concur with, and I'm not trying to be critical in any way, shape, or form, but it was my impression, and I have not talked to Councillor McPherson about this at all, when I went through this, and I've articulated that to some of the directors, and quite honestly, I've had 2 directors that have come to me that said, as we move forward this year, we want to have more discussion, specifically with me, as I'm a chair for sport, recreation, and culture, which involves parks, cemeteries, museums, and infrastructure, and I appreciate that, and I look forward to that moving forward. So, again, I'm not trying to be critical, but I just found it ironic that I'm in the queue right behind, and these were my discussions with the CAO. So, if there's any way to move that forward in future budgets, I would embrace that. I'm not going to get into I don't think the idea is to get into any of the budget projects at this point in time. I just had one quick question on that one pie chart. I believe it's on page 6, where the funding grants are. They're $344,900. That's other. Could you just clarify again what that is? Is that that doesn't fall under gas taxes and stuff? Is that more sponsorships and donations? Is that?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, that would be either, such as you said, donations, sponsorships, and if there's any salvage values on vehicles, things like that, that would be in there.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, if I could just address some of the councillors' questions. And again, Councillor, I'll say the same thing, that, I appreciate the input, appreciate the feedback. By no means do we see that as criticism. I think, we can always look at our process. In terms of council priorities, I will highlight that we received the last of our input from members of council in terms of what the priorities are, what you heard at the door. We will be going through an exercise in Q1 with a consultant to kind of bring all of that information together to formulate what is the priority plan moving forward, like you did last term, for the rest of the term. And those, again, will continue to be inputs. The council priorities you see on the chart that I keep going back to as inputs for the budget process are the council priorities we had from last year that roll over, and there's always that 1 year that covers, I think, 2 years that sometimes results in a changing council and sometimes doesn't. But absolutely, I hear the comments, and those are, I think, some good suggestions we can incorporate.
Thanks, Mike. I mean, that's fabulous to hear about the future focus, because when we developed that process, 3 terms ago, we were the leaders in Niagara doing that, and to hear that, and I think some of the councillors were feeling a bit hesitant that we hadn't done that yet. So, because that guided us, not only council and staff and the entire staff on what we need to deliver and how we're going to do it together. So that's terrific. So next councillor, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
I'm not
Don't touch the
touching.
button.
My colleague here is.
If she
making
tries,
su-
Councillor
he's
slap her
tying my
hands.
hands. I want to look at this a little bit differently. And part of that is because I want to ensure that anybody who's here, I don't want to single out Mr. Jansen all the time because he comes with such goodwill, but anybody that's here from the public, Mr. Culp is here, he's a member of the community, he's certainly here to find out what's going on. Library assistant, you know, members of the community as well as the staff. The way I look at this is that there are a list of infrastructure priorities which the staff put in place last year. And I look at this because that and this pie chart tell me where the mindset is of the staff. And I'm always very concerned about what those ratios look like. And when I look at page 2, and it shows us the town's 2019 capital budget focus, without doing anything else, without having any political discussions, without even looking at a list of priorities, I would say that those ratios, 44% on environment and safety, water, wastewater, fire rescue, and then 32% on transportation services, roads, sidewalks, bridge, streetlights, 32%. Then we get into social infrastructure, it's at 11%, but it's community facilities, parks, libraries. And the last one is corporate infrastructure, equipment, facilities, vehicles, 13%. So, you know, those numbers can change. It's, you know, it doesn't really, I don't worry about it too much, but in the big picture, they're where I think they ought to be. So that's one of the first things that I look at to judge where the staff are coming from. And then I look at funding sources. And the reason I look at funding sources is because there's a governance issue here that I don't think that we have quite grasped, because the asset management piece and the completely changed approach around DC charges, to say nothing of the volume of DCs that are going to be coming into this community, are going to be setting up another set of education and another set of the way we approach how we manage our money. Because I'm not so worried about the background reports. I have a lot of faith that when the staff have to do the background reports, they have to do the due diligence. If the staff make mistakes, if we find ourselves in a situation like we did last year, where the actual projections on numbers that came from the previous term were absolutely wrong, and I'm not talking a little bit, I'm talking about hugely wrong, then we've got a problem, and we did have a problem. So that's part of the issue with that list of things that don't get done. A lot of that had to do with where's the money coming from. So we need to recognize that what is the asset management decision? I mean, that's part and parcel of the discussion we're going to have. If the decision is that we need to have an executive committee, which we have avoided, if that's the decision, then we'll have an executive committee. And asset management will become a big part of that discussion. But so will the discussion around development charges, because the reason that the projects are where they're at, in my opinion, and from what I understand with the way the bylaw is written around DCs, is that money comes in and we better get spending it. It's not a matter of putting it in the bank and letting it sit there for the next 4 to 5 years. We are able to collect that money because development charges are available. So those are two major elements that we are not really considering. We are very concerned about the list. The list as it is right now, and the list as it's been in the past, has always gone through a political vetting, and it will be the same this year. You know, it's just the way it is. It has to be that way. It used to be done with the green papers. We've dispensed with that. It is a better method that we have. And then there's the issue of modeling. And we have many models. We have models for the way we do stormwater management. We have modeling for the way we deal with, you know, our repairs for the roads. It's quite extensive. We talk about those to a great extent. So when you're having those conversations, that's where the staff are picking up the flavor of the day. They're getting a sense, just like they are at the ward meetings, about what those things are. So I would say that this is not a bad news story, what's going on here. We have some very, very good framework in place, and we have some work to do in the way we are going to come together on the list. I have no argument with that at all. It's a fair question, and if that's the direction that we need to go, then we will be doing that. But we can't do that only focusing on the list. We have to make sure, Mr. Chairman, that these other pieces are in place, and I'm not questioning the asset management plan. We don't have a dedicated department, but it is now going to be required by the government. The province has said now, you will do it, and we will be there to monitor it. So I'm interested in knowing how that's going to be done. Not tonight, I'm just making a point. And then the issue of the DCs in terms of how it actually impacts on some of the things that are on that list. I would be interested to know whether there is an impact on that at all. But the management, our financial sustainability and risk management is going to be huge. And that is part of the governance of how this largesse that is coming our way has to be dealt with in the future. And I am very concerned about that because we're only getting one crack at this. When all of this development has gone away, will we have money in the bank? Will we have the projects done that we should have done? You know, what is this going to look like? And this is so, so important. So, okay, so we're going to have our elbows out tonight. That's okay. I think this is a very healthy discussion. And when we get this all sorted out, we'll sort out the business about how we're going to make lists, and it'll be all fine. But in the meantime, I'm not so disappointed with the way things are, but obviously things need to be tuned up a bit because we all have to be happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. See, good things come to those that wait.
Oh, I'm fine. I'm fine. I just need to learn.
Turn your mic off, though, now, so we can move ahead. Merci beaucoup. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is more of a suggestion than anything else. When I look through each of the projects, the one thing that I see missing, and it's maybe because I'm still new to this role, but it's the risk level. Like, I see a lot of detail in the benefits, I see a lot of detail into the risk, but risk level, and it would then give myself, other councillors, and even the public a little bit of intro into the expertise of SMT as to why they are prioritizing things the way they are so that they make that list. And that's what, when Councillor McPherson was talking about projects that were originally on the plan for 2019 and didn't make it, to me, there's nothing in here that kind of speaks to that flavor of why this or any particular project got in over another one. And I think a lot of that would have to do with risk level. I don't know how you quantify that, but that's just one of my suggestions, that somewhere down the road, we kind of look at that.
So through you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor, I think that's a great suggestion, and I was going to make this comment following the mayor's line of questioning and comments. But by 2023, we will be required and mandated, I think, as the mayor highlighted, to have that asset management plan in place. One of the things that we're going to also have, and that aligns to that plan, will be risk levels in terms of risk of failure, cost, and all the various details. So those are things we're going to work on, but definitely we can, do some of those things ahead of time and put that similar lens around risk to it. So I think it's a great idea, and I think it helps communicate, how the decisions are made and why they're made.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Russell, that was fantastic. I was thinking the same thing. And that, I mean, thinking too, going forward, that might help waylay the concerns why an item falls from this 10-year capital plan, rationale behind it. So I think maybe that's a supplementary piece, is that those projects that were here, that have fallen off, rationale behind it, where they might appear in that new plan. And then I think that provides a comfort level. Mr. CAO.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think the one comment I want to make, I think you make a great point there, is that, we have all that. That is what we are actually doing. I think what we're hearing is, let's communicate that and let's have that kind of, I think, conversation flow. Because I think as Councillor Brunet is nodding and I see all of you nodding, I don't think you're saying we're not doing that. We absolutely are doing that. We are going through, and Angela leaned over and said the same thing to me. That is exactly what we're doing, that very tedious, lengthy, days on end kind of conversations and analysis. So it's about, you know, how do we start sharing that and starting this conversation earlier?
Fabulous.
Thank you,
Councillor Timmers.
Chair Pachariva. Wow, a lot of discussion. I don't know where to start exactly, but when I see the list, I do the same thing. I look at the focus. I look at the pie. Where's the majority going? Why? What is the breakdown? And I'm happy with what I see. I also look at the funding sources. That's very important to me. How are we paying for it? Where is it coming from? And when I look at the list, I realize that the list is there for out of a lot of work has put this list together, and it's prioritized for reasons. And I trust the staff, the senior management team that put this together. And I'm not concerned about the list. We'll have our chance around the table to discuss changes to the list. And as far as the 10-year capital plan, I don't refer to it at all. I've looked at it. I don't refer to it. I don't consider it carved in stone. It's very fluid. It's always changing. So I'm okay with the way that we're moving forward. I'm always looking for any changes. I'm sure we can have more input, but I'm just concerned about creating the list around the table. How are we going to hammer that out if we're all looking for our ward or our political reasons of what we want on the list? So I see room for movement here still. This is not a done deal. It's just kind of how I approach it. And bottom line, I'm forever looking where the funding is coming from, and always I'm looking at what's affecting the levy. And I go through these projects and I highlight levy, 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 because that's my focus. Anyway, it's my opinion on it.
Thanks, Councillor Timmers. I do the same thing with my highlighter, everything that's levy impact, and have a look at that, because the other things that are coming from reserves, there is no impact, and they're probably there for an excellent reason to drive growth and to get ahead of the curve. Councillor Manchima.
Thank you, Chair Pachariva. So the discussion earlier on about when we're out at election time, when we're talking to people about priorities, and then we come back with our priorities, that's important. But I understand that throughout the year, we talk about budget, we talk about priorities. It's something we started last May. So to come forward now and expect things that we've heard just in the fall to be suddenly, you know, put on that list and we want to see it now, I don't think is reasonable. It doesn't make any sense to have to turn the ship around when we've carefully set the ship where it should be going. But as you said, Mr. Kokopoulos, that when we have our future focus discussions, we'll bring those priorities forward. And I think we should all sort of keep a master list of what we felt, that what we got out of our campaigning consultation with the community, keep a master list of what was really important to everybody and what we feel is really important in our individual wards and in the whole municipality, and carry that forward to next budget time. And as in May, when we talk again about the 2020 budget, compare that to our future focus document as a more specific list, and really keep that top of mind for 2020 budget. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, thanks for those comments, Councillor. And I think you're absolutely correct. I mean, the validation process that we go through with council happens on a basis that is very regular. We are coming to you, whether that be the exercise we went through in creating our vision, mission, values, whether that be all the engagement that we do. We did budget engagement. All these things are based on inputs. And again, I take all the comments that council has made this evening in a constructive way in terms of bettering the process. But once again, reemphasize what has gone into creating this process and conversation and what you see before you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillors, great questions, and staff. And you know what? Summing it all up, it's about information and sharing information and getting everyone on the same page. So I think we're all after the same thing. This is just me on a personal note. Before we have a look-see, and I think what we'll do is, when we go through the projects tonight quickly, we'll go one by one and we'll say, is there any questions? Because I don't want someone to get the floor and to dominate. So we'll do that, we'll go one by one, but you know what? If everyone, like a 5-minute break, because I've been drinking my water diligently and need to run out for a little bit. So if we could do that, if everyone's okay with that, and then we'll come back, ready to go. 5 minutes. We don't have any smokers here, so we're good. Okay? Well, okay, everyone ready to go? Mayor, it doesn't take that long to make a coffee. Okay, I would suggest you grab one of these chai green teas. They're quite refreshing, soothing to the voice. So, we're ready to roll? Okay, so I think what Councillor McPherson stops talking, we can commence. Stay in your lane, Councillor, stay in your lane. Okay, so what we'll do, and we'll let everyone do it from their seats tonight, is we'll start with project number 1. I will ask if there's any questions. If not, we'll move on. And I think that's how we'll treat it. And then remember, if you do have questions, hit your buttons and we'll get in the queue and then we'll get those points of clarification or insight answered. We're not picking winners or losers. We're not debating the merits tonight. That will come at a future date. So, Chief, are you going to take us, like, are you going to say, do you want me to say project number 1 technology update? Or would you like to do that? You're okay with that? Okay, so our first 2018 project is in the corporate infrastructure technology update. Any questions, any queries, any additional info required? Okay, I see none. So, project number 2, library IT update. And welcome, Janice. Anyone? Okay, I don't see any. Project number 3, redundant dispatch phase 6. Frantic flipping of the pages, nothing again. Moving right along. Facility security phase 2. Here we go. Councillor Brunet.
Thank you, Chair Pachariva. Just a quick question. Just curious, like looking at the areas that have been identified, I certainly look at the Scout Hut. Obviously, we've invested some money there. Not sure what's being housed there, so, I can understand, but just looking to see if there's any particular criteria as to how these 9 areas made the list and others didn't. Just a question.
Okay. Ms. McKay? Do you want to?
Thank you, through you, Chairman. So what staff has done, this is, there's a 2017 component to this project and a 2019 project. So in 2017, we had identified a number of projects that were not captured in this report. So what we're doing is we're actually looking at all town facilities and looking at the needs of the facilities, and then looking at either card access, alarm, or CCTV for the various sites within the town. We're going to be working alongside all the departmental, looking at departmental needs, facility needs, and then IT needs to manage the card access and the CCTV as well. So we have estimates that have been provided back in 2017 that we've been using to estimate what we need going forward. And then once we have those identified for needs, then we'll look at how much funding we actually can manage. And then if we have to move forward, we'll have a phase 3 next year.
Okay, but I don't think that was Councillor Brunet's question.
No, it really wasn't where I was going. So like, just as an example, and I'm not trying to get in the weeds. I'm just asking, like, for instance, there's one cemetery on here.
No, again, through you, Mr. Chairman, the sites have not been, we shouldn't have listed any sites on here that we
Okay.
want to do
Okay.
a review. So that's really the end of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sites, non-specific, to be determined. Thank you.
Okay, excellent question, Councillor. And if any of the facilities have already been equipped, and the Fleming Center for one, maybe a provision of that information might help. Okay. Councillor Mikluck.
Through you, Chair, to staff, just curious with regards to the security enhancement at the Jordan Lyons Park, what exactly does that include? And a second question, what's the security system currently at the Jordan Arena.
Through you, Mr. Chair, most of our major facilities have alarms that are monitored by password. The keying of those facilities right now is all master keys. So a big part of this is not just the security of CCTV and monitoring systems, but actually moving away from the actual keys that all of the staff have and that sometimes we have to give out to contractors or those who enter our facilities. So this would be a fulsome security system whereby we could code and set up profiles for the swiping of people into buildings at certain times, certain access, based on our profiles. The Jordan Lions, did you ask about the Jordan Lions Park?
Well, there's two structures, I believe. There's the structure where the baseball concession stand, and then there's the arena itself. I'm assuming that the arena itself has a current alarm system, motion, as well as keyed entry or door, contact entry.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd have to defer to Angela or IT because I don't know all of which ones have contacts versus motion versus.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Sorry, I don't have the information, so I'll have to call Mr. Brown down to answer that question.
Through you, Mr. Chair, for the arena, the Jordan Arena, it's currently key. For access, there is no tap cards anywhere. The facility is equipped with a burglar alarm at the moment, and that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. McCluck, any more, Counselor?
that's all,
No,
thank you.
you're good? Okay. I flipped too soon. So, project number 6, Town Hall Office Additions. Okay. And that's, and the last a project falling under the corporate infrastructure is the fleet replacement and enhancement. Okay. So moving along, now we go into, press your button. Councillor Michalak.
Thank you, through you, to staff. Just being a bit of nitpicky here, but one small car, green vehicle example, Chevy Volt, at a cost of $40,000. Is this a really necessary expense? Where's the benefit to this purchase? And just looking for advice on that. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor, we're not going to get into that tonight.
Oh, sorry.
So,
Okay.
so just points of clarification, like the questions before, we're gonna do the merits of these next meeting.
Perfect.
Okay?
I'm learning.
No worries. Mayor Easton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is about the process for fleet, and there may be others that come up. However, we have already determined before, and we have reiterated this to ourselves on more than one occasion, that we are going to make an allotment of money to Public Works on the matter of fleet, and it is, and they must do the justifications and spend the money according to what we allot. If we wish to audit that process in order to make sure that all of their expectations or the anticipated changes that they laid out for themselves have been met, then that's going to be part of our auditing process going forward. We don't have an auditing process to look at things like that right now, but that is part of our governance going forward, and we have committed to that. So I don't really need to see this list, but I'm certainly interested in knowing what the audit shows up, because I think that's what our job is.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to, oh, we've got another question. Okay. Councilor Benchima.
That was for the next project.
Well, then why don't you wait until I get into
You
that?
were just about to say it, and I,
Well, premature doesn't help anyone.
yeah, I'll.
So, moving on to our next pillar is environment and safety. So, number 7, Conkle Creek remediation. Councilor Benchima.
Thank you, Chair Patriva. So, so I understand that this estimated cost for this is this project is to prepare for Phase 2 construction for the Conkle Creek remediation. So, could I just get a little bit of clarification on exactly what all is involved in Phase 2, because I'm having a little trouble remembering.
Mr. Graham.
Thank you, through Mr. Chairman, to the councillor. As you recall, Phase 1 we completed in 2018, last year. And the intent with that is we built the naturalized channel offline of the existing creek, and we're letting that vegetate over the year with the intent to switch. Phase 2 entails switching the live creek into the new one we just created once it's stabilized and vegetated, and it's going to take a year to do that. Phase 2 of the creek works is basically going from where we worked this year, or in 2018, between the backyards of the houses where it's much more narrower, and we're not going to make it that wide, from where we did the Phase 1 towards the Serena Park direction, towards the Fleming Center. That's Phase 2, which is, we're planning to do that in 2020. This year, in 2019, when we had the public information centers, a lot of the residents who back onto the creek corridor raised concerns and inquiries, because when we do Phase 2, we're going to be establishing a multi-use trail all the way along the corridor from basically where it stops now by Meadowwood Park all the way to Green Lane. And a lot of residents raised concerns with the multi-use trail and privacy in their backyards area. So we want some time, and we have time because we have to let the creek vegetate in this year, to work with the residents and look at screening options that we could implement when we actually do Phase 2, such as hedges, fencing, that kind of stuff, and work through a lot of those issues so that we're ready to go with actual Phase 2 construction in 2020. So we'll be doing survey work to establish property bars, working with residents to find out where their concerns are with privacy and how we can mitigate that. Such, screening measures with shrubs, fences, et cetera.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Can you turn your mic off, Councillor?
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to the same project, I'm wondering, and I direct this maybe to Mr. Graham, is there any consideration to any wildlife disturbances through this entire process and maybe through Phase 2? Just recently, we're getting a lot of concerns about rodents in that area, and there seems to be a lot of fingers being pointed at the disturbances that were created through that. So I don't know if there's any, as part of this next development as you go into 2020, to maybe do a little bit of investigation on if that is a realistic source of the disturbances, or if it's not, and if it is, how can we maybe mediate that?
Through Mr. Chairman, to the councillor, a great comment, and by all means, we will, further investigate that to see if this construction work did disturb rodents and whatnot, and it's definitely good to be aware of that at this point as we head into the next phase, so thank you.
Okay. Project number 8, Lincoln Avenue, partial storm sewer construction. Project 9, Bartlett Creek West Branch Improvements. Moving from stormwater to wastewater. Project number 10, 21st Street Maintenance Hole Replacements. Okay. Into the waterworks section of Environment and Safety. Number 11, King Street Water Main Replacement, Mountain View Road to 30 Road. Councilor Bernay.
Thank you, Chair Patriva. So this is a project that I had considerable problems with, considerable concerns with. So just to reiterate with and confirm through you, Mr. Chair, to our Director of Public Works, like when I looked at this project at 1.4, almost $1.5 million for 1.2 kilometers of 200 millimeter PVC at 1.5, I struggled with this. So my first concern was, I understand, Councillor Russell asked about risk, and this is a project that I really think where risk is the reason why we need to proceed with this. Because if there wasn't the risk factor of going underneath the creek and having the Naponia home there and the nursing home, I just really couldn't put my name on this project because, it's a considerable amount of money. Now, I did find out, and I want to confirm again through our director, that the water main on King Street from Mountain View to 30 Road is not in the road. It's actually in the ditch because, to dig up that property, that roadway for 2 years now when the region comes in would be problematic. So I just wanted to confirm that. And then my second question is, if we don't get the OSIP top-up funding, where would the money come from this project? Obviously, there's 712 coming from the water reserve, but the remaining money, the 760, if we do not get the OSIP funding, where would that come? So I have the two questions there, Chair.
Okay. Mr. Graham.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor. Great questions. This particular water main is our highest risk water main currently. We're experiencing a number of frequent breaks. The problem with this water main as well, it's a dead-end water main, so it goes all the way to along King Street and even up Durham Road to the train track areas, if you know the area. So every time there's a water main break, we have to shut the water off. There's no way to provide water to the people on the other side of that break because it's dead end. So it is quite an impact to residents. And the region of Niagara is going to be reconstructing this road, but not until 2021, 2022 maybe. And operationally, we can't wait until then, given the risks with the water main. So we've decided to do it in a phased approach. We're going to phase the underground work. And back to Councillor Bernay's comments, it's a rural area, so the water main will be able to be outside of the roadway. The new water main will be in the ditch area. So we are keeping all that in mind. We don't want to be digging up the road twice, so that will not happen with this project. The funding, my understanding, would come from the water reserves, unless Ange has if we're not successful on the funding grant application that we've made.
So the full amount would then come from the water reserve?
Yes.
And so, thank you, Director, for clarifying that, because I really believe that this is a project that the risk certainly outweighs the cost, and so I will be certainly a proponent of this project. Just one other question, though. If you look at the map on page 21, so this water main goes underneath a creek, so is that what's also driving the cost up at 1.5? Is there jacking and boring going underneath that creek, or what else is driving this price? Through you, Chair.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yeah, good question in terms of the cost, and that's one of the main reasons you are seeing a higher cost with that risk. We do have to go underneath a creek. There's not a lot of room there either, so it will add cost to the project. But again, it supports how much of a high risk this project is, because if we get a break Now, under that creek area, it's gonna be very difficult and expensive to fix. So the sooner we can get a new water main in there, it'll be the right thing to do.
Thank you very much.
Mayor Easton.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just want to speak about the discussions that took place with the region. Considerable changes have taken place there in the last 4 or 5 weeks. So I'm sure that there were plenty of discussions about the timing, et cetera. Would we see any benefit at all in going back to them and checking again to find out if there was any flexibility whatsoever with their own timing? And if that were the case, would it make that much of a difference? I have no idea. The whole thing would have to be reworked. Through you to the CAO, potentially, as he probably was part of that discussion.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I see Director Graham wanting to answer part of that, but I can speak more broadly afterwards to going to the region and seeking, I think, some additional assistance on a number of projects. So we are going to re-examine timelines with the region at a macro level moving forward as well. But on overall, but on
that's
this
fine.
one specifically, I think Director Graham may have a comment he wants to
Okay.
make.
Mr. Graham.
Through Mr. Chairman to Madam Mayor, right before Christmas, I met with the Director of Transportation at the region to try and make sure, can you move this project forward, the King Street road rehabilitation, and they're not ready to. The soonest that they can get this project to a shovel-ready condition is 2021, maybe 2022. So they're still in the design phase. They just completed the EA stage. They are a bit behind with the project, and that's one of the reasons we want to move ahead with our water main works, so.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chairman, I'll leave it because it sounds like there's other things in the hopper, and that's good. Who knows what they'll need from us.
Okay.
Thank you.
And before you turn that off, and are you and Councillor Foster on Public Works at the region?
No, we're on planning and corporate services. He is on public works.
Okay, so then we will make sure that he becomes our foil for this, and that,
Well,
and you, yes.
CAO
Yes.
Kirkopoulos and I and Councillor
Excellent.
Foster are going to be meeting soon about all these projects.
Fabulous. And I just, and it's probably just a typo. So, Mr. Graham, it's Mountain View Road to Durham Road, not 30 Road, correct? Because the map shows that entire thing, but the project's identified as Mountain View to 30. It's probably double the length. So, thank you so much. So I'm going to change that. Oh, one other question too that I had. The 200 millimeter, so we're going to replace this with the PVC pipe. Knowing that the high school is going to locate there, knowing that we've got a couple businesses that are after water, will this size diameter be able to service those future needs?
Through Mr. Chairman, yes, for sure.
Okay.
Yep. That'd be
Fabulous.
a problem.
Fabulous. Okay. Project number 12, Second Avenue Water Main Replacement and Road Improvement Constructions. Okay. My question just was the length of that project, Mr. Graham.
Through Mr. Chairman, the length of the water main is approximately 600 meters.
Okay.
And it's a 150 diameter
Okay.
cast iron pipe.
So 150 cast iron going to 150 PVC?
PVC,
Okay.
yep.
Terrific. Okay. Project number 13, Smart Hydrant Inserts Phase 1. Okay, project number 14, Water Meter Replacement Phase 2. Okay. Last in the waterworks section, project number 15. Is that wax, valve, and hydrant maintenance trailer, is that how you pronounce that? It is, okay. Okay, so that concludes the waterworks section. Fire services, project number 16, Vineland Fire Station Design and Site Studies. Mr. Kirkopoulos.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to make a preliminary comment on this. I think you'll see in this work that we've got some studies and then we've got design. I think before we take any questions, because staff have had a further conversation on this, and I know I've spoken with a few members of council, I think that'll be phased and conditional work. We want to make sure that we get the approvals first in terms of land designations before we move forward with construction and design. So you'll see us go forward with the agricultural impact assessment, work with the region, and once we receive the go-ahead from the region, who is the body that provides that approval on behalf of the province, we will then come back to committee, update you on that, and then seek to proceed with design. So I don't know if Chief Hudson and or Ms. McKay have any additional comments.
No, all good? Okay. Project number 17, the Camden, I got it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is actually just a question maybe to Mr. Kirkopoulos, or CEO Kirkopoulos. Do you have any idea of what the turnaround time would be to get those assessments completed by? Like, would it still fall well within this fiscal or calendar year?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councillor Russell, I do see staff nodding, and the answer is yes.
Okay, so project 17, Camden Fire Station digital sign. Okay. Project number 18, fire equipment. Chief's getting off very easy tonight. But you know what? That's because the reports are written so succinctly. Project number 19. What's that? No, I know, not tonight. Not tonight. Points of clarification. Number 19, fire department fleet. Okay. And last but not least, project number 20, emergency management fleet. Okay. Social infrastructure is our next pillar. Project number 21. And thank you, Ms. McKay, for providing this, because to me, Oak Lawn Cemetery is in St. Catharines. So I thought, why are we spending money there? But we've got a frame of reference now, so any questions with Project 21, the Oak Lawn Columbarium, which is on Bridgeport Drive or 19th Street in the lovely town of Jordan Station. I knew there's a cemetery there, and I knew there used to be a hall there, but I had no idea what the name of it was, so. Facilities, project number 22, Jordan Arena Refrigeration and Mechanical System. Okay. Project number 23, Fleming Center Scoreboard. Okay, project number 24, Bennett Hall Facility Repairs. Be flipping along. I guess I got a question about the Bennett Hall, and it's just from my previous days of doing what I used to do. Did we, because of the issues that you get with a flat roof and you get that exfoliation of the brick, did we happen to attain a cost for putting a pitched roof on that at all? Ms. McKay?
To you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we actually, at a very high level, to actually get a detailed cost, we'd have to engage an engineer.
Okay.
But it's a little bit complicated. They would have to strip down the roof completely to do that. The cost of the trusses would be about 75%. So we'd be getting close, and what I learned that I didn't know is the flat roof actually has a longer life expectancy.
Oh,
So
okay.
the flat roof is between 25 and 30 years, whereas the shingles would be 15 to 20.
Okay. Because I know that we looked at that a couple of years ago when we went to do the expansion at Station 1. And then that was part of the plan, but it fell by the wayside, unfortunately. So I just, whenever I see a flat roof, I've become cognizant and I ask that question. So thank you very much. Now we go into parks. So number 25, the Jordan Pool Splash Pad. Number 26, the park asset replacements and repairs. Project number 27, the Ted Roberts Park parking lot repaving. Okay. Project number 28, and again, thank you for the locational map, the Charles Daly Park driveway repaving. Okay, and our last park. Well, it was handed out in your little package of handouts, so you should have that right here. It's nice in color. Okay. So after the meeting, we can punch holes in this and put this in your binder as a point of reference. Okay. And I would say a former comment that I used to say, but I'm not going to say it, but I'm just going to say, project number 29, the Serena Park Development Phase 1. It's a catchphrase I used to like to use. I don't use it anymore. Okay, fantastic. So, last but not least, our final pillar is transportation. So, number 30, road resurfacing and rehab program. And again, Mr. Graham, thank you for the updated past, what we've done, and the projection for the future without even asking for that. So, Psychic, I'm going to take you to the casino afterwards. Okay. Project 31, Culvert Rehabilitation and Replacement Program. Okay. And I had asked a question on this when we were going through initially about if there was any way that we could tie this into. No, you know what? I'm ahead of myself. Never mind. But this is funded out of our special infrastructure levy that we've set aside, because culverts and bridges currently they're not life cycle costed. So by having that infrastructure special levy that we adopted 2 years ago, this is where these projects are funded from. Project number 32, the Guide Rail Assessment and Installation Program. Okay, Project 33, Green Lane Road Reconstruction, the design portion of this project. Okay, project number 34, Frost Road Bridge number 20, replacement options. And I guess changing of the wording. So rather than say construction costs, should read in your project costs, construction analysis and design. Because I thought if we're gonna be able to build this for $25,000, we should take that model and replicate it all over. And Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Pachariva. I don't know what project, are we past 33? Are we still on 33?
We have passed 33, so we're on
Going very
34.
quick. Okay, I just had just an information question. Going back to 33, through to staff, I'm just wondering about the revenue sources, why it's a split between capital levy and DC. I just want to understand why.
Is that Ms. Fanny?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, this project is growth-related, so 50% is to growth and 50% is to existing development. So we have to fund half of it, and the other half comes from development charges.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted clarification. Thank you.
Okay, so Nothing on the Frost Road Bridge. And our final project, Elizabeth Street Road reconstruction. Okay, and if I may, Mr. Graham, just from issues that we've had in that area and what we learned from bundling Drake and Marguerite and that neighborhood, wondering, and just, if that section of Highland Park Drive that needs urbanization, and also Glen Ellen and Charles, where they would fit in that big picture, because that was the issues that we've had there with the water diversion and things like that. So
Through you, Mr. Chairman, for sure. I think some of the issues, just to make you aware of, we would like to pave Highland, Williams, some of those streets in that area, because the road is in poor condition. But they have metallic ductile iron water main under the road, older sewers. So to do them properly, we've got to reconstruct the entire roadway and urbanize it. And so we've got to weigh that out against some of the other large urbanization projects that we're looking at in the next term as well. So, which have been deemed a little bit higher priority, higher volume roads and things like that. But we can have, definitely further.
yeah, just because of the learnings of, we were going to do Drake one, and then we were going to do, and rather than disrupt the neighborhood over 2 summers, it was great doing that over one. So just keeping that in mind. So, okay. Any other questions from council with respect to the projects tonight? Not tonight. No. That'll come next. So next time we're going to go through and we're going to look at merits. We're going to have those hard questions, and then. Well, no, I don't. Okay, so, but this isn't meant to be a flurry of green sheet projects, but if there's things that you want staff to bring back to consider, yes. Press that button.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there are a number of projects that I didn't see on the list that were on the 2019 list, and I'd like to find out what we're doing with these projects. One is right at the top of the list, Jordan Arena new roof, which I'm assuming we don't need if it's not on the 2019 list, or it's something that we can delay, and maybe I can just go through the 3 or 4 that I've got, or maybe 5. The other one is Hickson Street parking lot. We talked a lot about new parking spots in the downtown, and we had $70,000 put away or scheduled to be going into the 2019 budget. So that is project number 2. Project number 3 is road condition assessment equipment. And we've talked about how we're assessing our roads, and I'm not sure that we are doing anything other than eyeballing them or driving them today. And there was equipment that we've talked about for a couple of years that would do that more scientifically. So I wanted to raise the question of, are we interested in that? And would that fall in here? I'm very interested in the 13th Street closure project. And going back to June of 2017, we passed a motion that we would look at a design for reopening that road, and that we would then put that into the capital plan. So obviously, we're not seeing that in this list of projects, and I think that's a very important project for us, and one that, you know, has been 5 years in the making now, 5 or 6 or 7 years that we've since the rainstorm of 2014. And then just, there was in the 2019 capital plan, also some prep work that we were putting almost $600,000 to for utility relocation allowance for the Jordan Improvement Project, and where are we at with that? So, whoever wants to start. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Start with Hickson Street parking.
Yeah, we're going to bring those back, Mr. Kirkhoff.
Okay,
for-
just
Yeah,
gonna- just
so
those
you've
lists?
thrown
Okay,
those out.
all right.
We've got a list, and we'll bring those to the next meeting and have those as part of the discussion. Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Patriva. I only have one item on my list, and I think it's very important in my ward, or our ward. And Greg and I heard loud and clear at the doors, Rittenhouse Road is in extremely poor condition, is unsafe. There's no sidewalks. Councillor Wayne McMillan and I was going to call him Councillor, brought this forward 4 years ago. And I would really like to have that area looked at and examined, and any possibilities of doing something in the very near future. That's top of mind, my top priority. Thank you.
Counselor Brunei.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Before I make my comments, I just wanted to reinforce what Councillor Timmers just said. I know through Active Transportation, we did a walk-around at the 20 Valley School 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. We had staff there. We had Diane, Walter, and a number of people, as well as the school bus. The principal at the time was Lauren Gretzinger, and it was identified Rittenhouse was a major issue, and it was discussed in those meetings. All those residents were very concerned, as well as the school and the busing people. So I would certainly enforce what Councillor Timmers is saying there. My comment, Councillor, our Chair, Patriva, would just be, it's not a budget item per se. I guess in just speaking with my colleague, Mayor Easton here, it's more just, you know, what is our strategy as we move forward? I'm not looking for a budget item, but just to put things in perspective, you know, one of the big things that we've looked at over the last few years, and I think very effectively, is what we heard in terms of speed reduction, awareness, education. So, you know, we have invested in speed radar signs. We've done that. We've invested. We had 1, we had 2, and now we're up to 4 or 5, and that's great. But, you know, now it's to the point, what are we doing with that data that we've collected? And we still have people complaining. So, you know, we've reduced speeds in the areas that we identified around schools and parks and those areas, but we still have a lot of people telling us that there's issues. So just a question, and maybe it falls more into the operational rather than the capital, but, you know, we're hearing people are still looking for speed bumps. You know, we heard many things during the campaign about speed bumps working very well, effectively, but we need more. So just a thought process as we move forward. I'm not looking for an answer, but just I think it needs to remain in the front of our thought process, that those are things we've started. People are acknowledging, embracing what we've done, but they're looking for more. So a lot of that comes down to enforcement, and maybe that we get in the capital budget, but speed bumps, intersection improvements. We're hearing streetlights in a lot of areas, whether it's Stadelmeyer, and a lot of those things are regional roads, and I know the mayor has told me that between her and Councillor Foster, they're going to bring these things forward through the region. So look forward to working collaboratively with those items that we've started and keep them moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, because you know what, and that's, I mean, that's one of the things that actually probably unites all of us and the comments that we heard at the door is speed. And, looking to reduce, take it one step further, reduce that speed in all neighborhoods to that 40 kilometers an hour. And the questions from the residents about installing more speed bumps, installing traffic items, installing traffic calming measures per se, and being, what's the word I want to use? Not proactive, but being innovative about them, trying to see things that other areas have done, and we've seen some of that with the painting of the green crosswalks, and knowing that was probably the number one refrain, and people were looking to buy into that it didn't show up in the capital budget. Maybe it's going to come in operational, but speed bumps and things like that are capital. So if that can come around, I think it would be fantastic. Thank you, Councillor. Mayor Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I also want to speak to the issue of Rittenhouse, and in a little bit different way. I thought your description of Elizabeth Street was very good, and I think we could create a story around Rittenhouse that was very similar to that. So we don't want to get into a competition, because you could line these two projects up in terms of community improvement. This one has a school, the same as Elizabeth Street. This one has safety issues within the street corridor of Rittenhouse plus Cherry Hill plus Heritage. And so the road conditions, of course, it's not great. But we also have Victoria Avenue and the safety issue for cyclists. And so when I go then to your rationale, which I felt was quite good, around Cameron and the whole Drake survey, and you start looking at this, you've got heavy-weighted trucks coming down, people at Heritage Village that are really frightened of cycling and walking even on the sidewalks. So you have to create an internal community now for kids and for the elderly and for people that just want to move around, and for cycling as well as a safe crossing from the school, and then being, if you live on that side, and then how you're going to move through that neighborhood. So I realize that this becomes much bigger, but we have these CIPs, and they're great because they give you the framework. And Vineland is going to, very soon, the opportunity is going to be right in front of us in terms of how it's going to become that retail anchor on the East End with a new grocery store and with all of the plans that are going to be coming forward. We're going to be right into that. So just in terms of the political imagery for people that live in that area, this is going to be a real hot spot. And I think that creating a story around Rittenhouse as that center and doing, drawing in, as you've suggested, Mr. Chairman, a story about what that looks like, going down there, doing the examination of it, then we come back and we look at these two major projects and see how we can push them forward. Because we may find ourselves making a political decision on this, which is based on really a very, very high-level needs, because they both have been on the agenda for quite a long time. And I don't think that people are really too interested in hearing the litany of reasons why anymore. So I would like to suggest that we start thinking about things very holistically. We've had some experience with this. It's worked well. I think this could be really quite an excellent approach. And I also want to speak about, again, it's about creating that story around safety that Councillor Brunet has brought forward. And so I would just ask that the staff consider how we could potentially examine that, how we could tell that story without just creating a list of expenditures in the operating budget. I want to see what that looks like. What does that safety story look like? And what needs to be involved in it, and then potentially what should it cost? Other than that, we'll debate out the rest of them when we get there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, and you know what, and excellent comments, and I think, too, looking at, having been out there with Councillor Brunet on the walk around and seeing that, the Rittenhouse design is in 2021, construction in 2022 in the 10-year capital plan, and I, the fluid nature of that 10-year capital plan, if, we've identified those deficiencies, possibly, and I don't mean to have any presupposition, but maybe that will come to the height of the transportation master plan. And knowing that that's coming out in the very distant future of 2019, that some of those things can be captured. At Active Transportation, we had that conversation around safety. Some of the lay members on that committee and their experiences going around, the safety feature of the trails and the trail network and the connectivity of that, rather than riding on those roads. So, again, the committee had asked, some of our trails are not multi-use trails. When they were built, they were undersized. So, getting things like that, knowing that they're going to be identified in the transportation master plan, that there is a deficiency, getting ahead of that curve, trying to be proactive, getting that safety look and saying, okay, how much might that be? Might there be grant money? Might there be things to do it? So, Your Worship, excellent questions there. Anyone else? Okay. Now, you know what? I'm just going to kind of maybe try to tie everything together. You know what? I think this was an excellent first meeting. Kind of had a snapshot of where we are. We kind of came back with you know what? We need more pieces to the story, but the communication is there. And it's about providing that initiative and rationale and risk assessment. So then again, we become as informed as the SMT. So then when we're given those questions or asked those, inquiries on the street, we've got, an informed and an educated response to give. And I think it becomes very cyclical, going forward that you know what, this is not SMT and this is not council. But you know what? We're going to be like this. We're going to be talking, Your Worship, I'm going to use one of your colloquialisms. We are going to be singing from the same songbook. And together, we are going to make the town the best we can be. So, excellent. First evening. I see no further questions. I've lost my speaking notes. I am sorry, Julie. I know they're here somewhere. Ah! Thank you, Trish. So, we require a mover this evening in order to receive the presentation from staff.
Because we talked about that.
Mayor Easton,
I have a question.
after my eloquent bow tie on the event, you have a question? Okay, you know what?
I don't mean to offend you.
Well, I take a bit of offense, but go ahead. Don't let it happen again under my watch. I will not. I will not. Go ahead, Your Worship.
I thought it fit in.
Then we'll go to the motion. Last time.
It fit in perfectly with your comment about making Lincoln the best it can be. Okay, it's a
Okay.
technical question that we will need for the next time around.
Okay.
On page 4, there is a graph called projected borrowing per capita. And we knew in 2018 that we were going we were going to be on the curve here. We were going to be going up, and then we were coming down. So my question is, as the DC charges come in, as I spoke to before, it's important for us to know what that pattern is going to look like, how we're going to use that money, and so that we can make sure that when we get to 2022, we are on the down. But here's my question. Because we have this pattern of having to spend, and we've had it for the last, well, let's say we've had it for 2.5 years, probably more accurate. Are we going to repay the levy for any growth costs out of DCs? That's my question. I don't need the answer tonight, but I want to know what our plan's going to be. It came up at the region today. I thought it was an excellent question because the burden has been significant in some areas. So I would like to know what we're going to do about repaying the levy. Meaning that it goes back into the DC fund. Or, sorry, it comes out of the DC fund and goes into those reserves, if you wish, whatever it is. But I want to see if there's relief for that, if there could be relief for it. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for your
Okay.
tolerance.
You are welcome, Mayor Easton. So we have Councillor Timmers going to move that motion to accept the presentation we received tonight. All in favor? Fantastic. Confidential items, I see none. Staff remarks. Mr. Kirkopoulos, would you like to tie a bow upon the staff's remarks tonight?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think I tried to do that towards the end of the presentation, but I look forward to being in front of you again, updating you and sharing some of the information. Staff have taken some detailed notes, and we look forward to this continued process.
I too look forward to the process. So, there being no further business, we are adjourned.